invest in people in the long term, there has to be a mutual understanding
Hustle
and
hard,
mutual
hustle, hustle, hustle hard. Closed mouths don't get fed. Thinking strategically, but acting like a gorilla is the kind of marketing that's small for the planet. Innovates very little. It's highly risk averse. And it takes
any different. And I was around an environment where my family would glorify, in a sense, the business owners and the entrepreneurs in society because they're the one putting in work and they're the one hiring staff members and they're the one creating new products. They're the ones serving customers. We're creating economic returns. I mean, it wasn't to any extreme, but my father and grandfather like, hey, this is we work hard, we treat team members well, we take care of our responsibilities, and we move forward. And so, how I was conditioned growing up, in a sense, is that the political leaders in society were there to help us. Like they're there to help us create order and make it easier for us to do what we do. And so when I adopt that approach and I think about my own ethical code and my own moral framework and my family's moral framework, I sort of agree. We're going down a path of trying to help our staff members, trying to help communities. We're doing what's right for customers. We're creating value in the marketplace. So anytime government wants to get in the way of that or slow that down, it's frustrating. And anytime government wants to help us with that and come alongside of us, it is very uplifting. And we, for a very long time, we have always been a part of the political conversation. We've always been a part of the Chamber of Commerce, leading the Chambers of Commerce conversations, advocating for politicians to come to events, promoting politicians that share similar values as we do, inviting politicians to events, regardless of what party they represent. Mayor Wallace, one of my favorites, and Greer, two people in Florida City that Greer is the name of Mayor Wallace's wife. We're so grateful when we moved our organization from the Keys to Florida City. I mean, we bought a new facility in Florida City and we beautified the area and we created an environment really that was hopefully honoring God in a sense and helping people. And that's what my father and I were about. And we received a ton of support. Of course, as I grow and learn and step into other realms of leadership and business, I realize that government isn't always there to help me and that I need to learn how to work with different people who have different political mindsets. And as I have transitioned more into an academic role, the conversation about government and ideologies and politics, and it has sort of been interesting to listen to other perspectives. And I've obviously learned a lot. I have tuned in very hard to political conversations over the last 2 years. And over the last 4 months, I have tuned out completely. And let me tell you something. This is, I guess, a personal antidote here. It has given me such peace. It has given me such reverence for life and beauty once again, and people, like having this undenying love of people in my life, regardless of who they are, whatever, and to see people differently without the politics as a point of contention. But I know as a business leader, it's very important that we understand political systems. It's very important that we understand how these political philosophies actually can shape our personal lives, can shape our communities, can shape our families, can shape our businesses. So we're going to get into that tonight. So what I'm going to hopefully help discuss, or what we're going to talk about, is business and government are interconnected. So laws, regulation, and policy decisions shape how companies operate and compete. So it's very important to understand that. And so I kind of enunciated that with my intro conversation there. But leaders, all of you in this class, have to actively engage. This is my ploy to you, similar to how my father and grandfather have taught me. And really, I think what this class is about too, the political environment. And when I say actively engage, it means like do it appropriately as a business leader, as an ethical individual that's representing an organization through compliance, relationships, and strategic influence, not outlandish, crazy influence. Strategic influence, I think, is most effective. So there's always a tension here between business and government, balancing organizational interests with ethical responsibility in different global political systems. Now, think about it. It's hard enough to do it within our local community. It's hard enough then to do it within our state. It's hard enough to do it within our nation. And now we're asking us to export our business to other nations and talk about global environments. So this is a fun story that happened during the financial crisis of 2006, 2007, 2008, and really leading up to what would be considered to be the subprime mortgage crisis and the deterioration of a multitude of different banking infrastructures because people were issuing loans that they should not have been issuing, packaging them up and selling them. It was just a disaster. And by the way, just as a side note, because of government and central control in a sense, and because of the taxation that they have created, a lot of that error, and this should be more of a case study that we study in this class, but a lot of the error and the bailouts came from taxpayer dollars. So our money that we pay in taxes and the money that has curated from the system is now being managed at a high level and being given based on a political power to certain companies and not being given to others. So making major decisions with taxpayer funds is what the government has sort of come to the conclusion. Another reason why we should be involved in it. So there was a story about this financial crisis and the lead up to it. And this lady, Wendy Heidelberg, who is she? She's a policy economics she's a policy economist working in government. So she had a medium sense of power. Like she had some power in the government in a decent scale. But does anybody know who Warren Buffett is? And he fundamentally stays out of politics. There's a wonderful book that I recommend called The Snowball. It's a great story about his life and how he became wealthy and some of his philosophy there. I encourage you to read it. But he's a businessman, and he is a philosophy in finance, and he has made some great business decisions. Continues to make great business decisions. And if you pull back the curtain on a lot of his businesses, you'll notice that a lot of them are operating very ethically. And so he usually tends to hold majority shares in these big companies. So he still has control. And a lot of like he'll own 51%, he'll own 30% of stocks, but he's like his brother and his sister own the other, 20%. So it's really easy for him to have majority influence within organizations. And he likes to have that because of his standards of operating. He wants to be able to come in and kind of take over control. So Wendy Edelberg sent a note to Warren Buffett. And Wendy Edelberg said to Warren Buffett, "Hey, we have this political whatever coming up. I'm sorry, this economic financial disaster looming. We need you to come up to Washington and help us out with it. We need some advice." And Warren Buffett, he's an Omaha guy, and he's out there. He's just, I don't politics. I'm not going to come up there. No, thank you, Wendy. I'm not going to come. And then Wendy, after she received that note from Warren Buffett, then basically said, you know, the ask is not an ask anymore. We are formally mandating you to travel up to Washington. And so we're not asking you, we're telling you to come to Washington. And at that point, Buffett essentially showed up and either testified or gave some advice on what he would do in a situation like this. So what does this show us? We have an economic giant over here in Warren Buffett, and we have a political person over here, Wendy Edelberg. Warren Buffett subordinated himself because of coercion from a political power to Wendy Edelberg. Who's more powerful, private business or government? It's a different type of power, and you're right. Because why? Because government has formal power. The government essentially can say, wealth has influence, but government has authority. So an authority can be mandated to everybody, not just a few people. Warren Buffett might affect some of his companies. He might have some economic influence. He might gain, money and whatever. But that money is usually tied up within institutions that governments could, if they wanted to, have some influence in. So government is very powerful, especially in the United States at this point. So you're not wrong in any regard. You're actually correct. And what that is it's influence. It's economic influence, and the proletariat and the bourgeoisie and the aristocrats all had this struggle for a long, long time. And the aristocrats had a ton of power. And why? Because they had a ton of money. And so that has been what you mentioned has been a part of political philosophy since day one. And is it fair? It is what it is. But my point here is not that, they might have influence. My point here is ultimate coercive power. And what do I mean by that? It's compelling through mandate versus asking through influence. And hopefully you see the difference there. So a politician asked Warren Buffett to appear before a committee, but he declined, highlighting the limits of political influence over wealth. But of course, as we mentioned, the politicians can come in and compel you through force, through police power, through legality. And so that's kind of the point. We are now individual. We are trying to have our individual ethics, and what begins as personal decision making expands into our organization, as we mentioned in class. Then it expands to society, and then there's a political impact to our companies, to our individual ethics, to our organization's ethics, to society, and to politics. So from personal, institutional to political, businesses translate values into systems, policies, and influence that shape entire communities. So this is where, when you really think about it, there's a wonderful, it's called existentialism in philosophy, that talks about my decisions aren't just my decisions. My decisions are universal decisions. Why? Because my example, my words to you right now, my ability to create an effective classroom environment is influencing you, which you influence other people. It's not just a minute thing. Like, I'm a part of something that has a universal total. And so that's why looking at your ethics and looking at your values and doing your research and listening to conversations tonight and having some thought and having, understanding the different sides in these debates that we're going to have, this is so important, because our individual decisions that lead to our group decisions, that lead to our societal decisions, that lead to our political decisions, they matter. And so that this is kind of the point. So the key insight here is leaders are not just making ethical choices, they are designing environments and systems that affect society at scale. So where good laws begin. So ethics precedes policy. And this is very important to understand. Laws, this is codified law. This is where I said, when this lady, Wendy Edelman, says, okay, now I have the power, therefore I can make a law saying that at any time when the government requests your presence, like, you must be here, that's written somewhere, or that letter would have had no cloud. Laws are built on underlying beliefs about what is right and just. And I mentioned last class, which is very important. Anytime you talk about politics, you're always talking about this difference of ethics of what's good and what's bad. And of course, the terrible way of saying it in some way, just to create emotional tension, is, what's godly and what's evil. They'll say whatever it takes to kind of get people to that's evil. And truly it's different, but it's not evil. I mean, maybe it is. And your definition of that is you're putting what's called a normative perspective on something. You're not describing something. You're putting your values on it. It's a normative belief. You're saying what ought to be versus what is. So the is ought thing is very fascinating. So government doesn't create morality. It codifies and enforces values that society already holds. Quality of laws depend on ethical foundation. So all of us in this class, we have an ethical foundation. If you have a good ethical foundation, we talk about ethics, we take this class, hopefully we'll go influence others. What we do here matters. And if we all had some kind of ethical agreement on something, we could very easily go and build a coalition and lobby politics to do something on our behalf. So it starts with us. Quality of laws depend on ethical foundation. Weak or flawed ethics equals poor policy and outcomes. So leadership, our responsibility, those in power shape laws, so their ethical framework matters. The global implication, different countries define good differently. It leads to a variation in laws and business expectations. That's the key takeaway with tonight, is that ethics in different countries are different. They lead to different laws, and those laws in different countries are different laws in different countries. So we have to abide by them if we're going to do business in these countries. And then the question is, do we want to do business in countries that have laws that we would consider to be unethical, or that we would consider to be too much, like laws that are restricting freedom or restricting free trade or restricting something that we believe to be innovative and we believe is important for us to be able to create. So government holds universal authority. This is kind of the point back where we were talking about Wendy versus Warren Buffett. Its rules apply to everyone, not by choice. This is what's tough. Businesses use influence and incentive. So this goes back to what Emily said, is that, businesses do have influence and they have incentives, and people participate voluntarily, at least in the US, in businesses. And so there's major economic influence and power there in a sense, because there's a lot of people, there's a lot of profit potentially, but government holds universal authority. So the key difference here is business persuades, government compels through law and enforcement. And obviously, if you have certain key business people working with government officials, that is even a stronger way to persuade the public or other countries. So this is just a cool visual to see. It's probably not that clear, but what you can see here is organizations and the sheer volume of these organizations compared to countries. So these are multinational companies, Walmart being, I think, the largest and company in the world, and also the one who employs the most people. And the power that Walmart has, when we talk about GDP, it means gross domestic product. It means the amount of production that the people within that country have been able to create. So when you look at Argentina and their production that they were able to create in GDP, that's how we measure production there. And you think that production is very similar to revenue. So Walmart, sheer revenue, being able to take in sales, being able to collect money essentially from customers, or bill customers, whatever they do. The amount of money that comes into Walmart, sheer sales, is the same size as Argentina. The entire country of Argentina is Walmart. And then even it's bigger than Ireland. Walmart's bigger than Ireland. It's bigger than Malaysia. It's bigger than Singapore. It's bigger than the Philippines. It's bigger than all of these different countries. Romania, Czech Republic. Walmart is bigger than all of them. And then, of course, these other companies here, Sinopec Group is bigger than most countries on this list. Royal Dutch Shell, China National Petroleum, State Grid, BP, ExxonMobil, Volkswagen, Toyota Motor, and Apple are all on this list that are comparable in power. The sheer size of the company are comparable in economic production as some of these countries. So what's the point in all of this? So some multinational corporations generate revenues larger than entire countries, significant global influence. This is the point. So job movement. Shift jobs to lower wage countries is something that these companies can do to save costs versus domestic job loss concerns. So major decisions that these companies are making, because they're sheerly huge, is that are we going to outsource that to India, to China, to a different country, and are all of our local people here no longer going to have the opportunities? Technology and employment, labor saving innovations, increase efficiency, potential reduction in workforce. That's obviously contentious today as well. Are we moving in a free market capitalistic kind of way to just efficiency and effectiveness, and therefore we're going to adopt technologies? And when we adopt technologies, we want to still preserve our sheer might. And in preserving our sheer might, we're going to have to fire some people along the way. Global inequality. And so when Walmart decides to do that, you're talking about the impact on thousands of people. When Miami-Dade College decides to do that, you're talking about the impact on hundreds of people, like maybe 100 people. So it's like, this is why these organizations, because they're so big, because their decisions, especially their ethical decisions, why they matter so much, because they affect so many people from a utilitarian perspective. So global inequality is concerned. Criticism that multinational companies may widen gaps between developed and developing nations. So they're sort of discriminating against certain nations. And so they're going towards developed nations and they're not going towards underdeveloped nations. Supply chain ethics, firms responsible for practices across global supply chains. IKEA. So IKEA, apparently, this is a terrible story. So there was a past use of forced labor under East German regime. So I think this is post World War II, but there were still some, um, let's call them labor camps after World War II that IKEA was utilizing these labor camps, kind of like prisoners in a sense, and IKEA was using them to make furniture at mass. And so this was something that IKEA decided was going to be their competitive advantage because obviously it's like a penny a day, if that, if not just free labor, because they had some deal with these German labor camps, and that was considered to be a strong reputational long-term damage to IKEA because it was clearly discovered what they were doing, and they made the choice. The executives knew what they were doing, and they did it intentionally to save money for profit purposes. So accountability and reputation, actions past and present shape trust, monitoring and transparency now expected. So that's a cool vision because I want you to see the this impact that these decisions, these ethical decisions, are being made. These ethical decisions have major influence all over the world. So now we're going to get into these different political systems and the different sort of political philosophies that some of us in this class and society at large adopt. And I hope that this enlightens a little bit about why people believe what they believe. And I'm leaning back and harkening back, and I always will in this class about these three different moral philosophies. We have egoism, we have altruism, and does anyone remember the third one? It's predation. So we have predation, we have egoism, and we have altruism. And so these three different moral frameworks about how I look at the world and how I think things should operate. A lot of people kind of have consolidated them into these three things. So when you think about egoism in society, ethical egoism leads to a political philosophy where individuals are able to pursue their own interest and engage others voluntarily. This is an exchange of a win-win, mutually beneficial exchange. I'm looking out for myself, so therefore I'm going to sell you a product that is good because I want you to pay me money for it because you're going to use this product. And when you pay me the money for it, I'm going to use that money for something else that I value more. So that's a mutually, you like the product, I like the money, we both win, win-win. I'm going to go back and create more awesome products, so you're going to pay me more awesome money. And yeah, I care about you in regards if you have enough money to buy my product, and that's pretty much it. I'm not interested in your kids' daycare situation and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, if we're friends, I might help you out, but inherently in the marketplace, we're self-interested. And so there's an egoism in society there. So in an egoistic framed society, individuals are free to pursue their own interests without coercion. This is a big deal. This is capitalism, really, in a sense of understanding the power of that, because monarchs and tyrannical rulers and Mussolini and Caesar of Rome. I mean, these are historical figures who essentially rule with an iron fist, and there's no such thing as individual freedom. There's the collective, and that's it. And you're a part of the collective. So it's a remarkable thing to think that I can choose individualism and I could choose my self-interest over the collective. And that is really what led to this free market logic. And remember, we talked about that when we talked about the tragedy of the commons. When you think about the commons, you think about all of the crazy things that could happen. I gave you the story about the bathroom and the kitchen in my fraternity house. And so we talked about this big 2,000 acre field. Everybody put their cows out there. And then what do we do? Like, who builds the fence and who weeds the fields? And, what if somebody puts more than 20 cows out there and they have 25 and I only have 20 and I'm going to go and put more? So it just kind of falls apart in a sense. But when we create private property, when we're only interested in our investment of, $100, we're going to receive 100% of that return. So this is where private property and individual choice starts to come into the conversation. Voluntary exchange relationships, business, trade work are based on mutual benefit and not force. Foundation for free markets, competition and self-interest can drive innovation, efficiency, and growth. And so the assumption in this free market logic, ethical egoism naturally aligns with free market systems based on voluntary exchange and individual productivity. It means when individuals pursue their own good, this is kind of that whole concept. When you take care of yourself, it's actually helping me because I don't have to take care of you. Like, just take care of your own responsibilities. I'll take care of mine, and we're both going to benefit. Can lead to broader societal benefits. So the key tension, obviously, is self-interest. It just like doesn't sound good, right? Like, it's just like I'm only self-interested. Obviously, that's not always the case, and certainly not the case with a lot of people that are pursuing free market capitalism. It's just a system. They're not taking any personal value from it. Like, I'm just a self-interested person. No, they're working the system so they can provide for their family and invest for their future, versus potential harm to others. So sometimes that self-interest could harm others. Where, if at all, should limits be placed? And so this is the key tension. So now we're moving from the egoism and free market economy to what does it look like from a predatory lens, from a person that says, this whole self-interest thing. I'm the alpha wolf. I'm the strongest. I'm the smartest. I'm the most talented. And really, what everybody should do is just listen to me. And if they don't want to listen to me, I'm going to make them listen to me, or I'm going to subdue them in some kind of way. I'm going to hire my lawyer to, go after their funds, and inevitably, I'm going to want to compete to be on the top. This is a predatory moral vision. And candidly, in some situations, in some places, this vision is still very much walked out, and people still believe this. I mean, even in military and even in the WWF, that's terrible because that's fake wrestling. What is it, when they get into the cage and the fighting that's real, the
MMA.
UFC? Yeah, MMA fighting. Like, this is,
UFC.
come on, this is predatory at its finest. Like, I'm going to train. When I get in there and I look across from you, I'm going to dominate you. So we see this in sports. Sometimes we see this in organizations. Candidly, we see this in young boys. Just on the play box, just like for whatever reason they don't like someone, so they throw sand at them. Like this. This is a real thing. So the good life is defined by domination, zero-sum gain, and immunity from others through accumulated power. Politics of predation tends to lead to a dictatorship as an outcome. Success is defined by power, dominance, and winning at others' expense. Accumulation of power, individuals or groups seek control to protect themselves and gain advantage over others. So that's another thing about predation too. It's you're seeking power and control because you know that in your seeking of power and control, you're making a bunch of enemies, and you're going to need power and control to shield yourself from those enemies. So it's an interesting feedback loop there. Breakdown of voluntary exchange, relationships shift from mutual benefit to coercion and exploitation. So candidly, this person, Wendy, in politics, used this predatory philosophy to get Warren Buffett to come to Washington, D.C. Political outcome, dictatorship. Power concentrates in a few hands to maintain control and suppress oppression. So when ethics shift from cooperation to domination, political systems tend to move towards control and not freedom. So that's the predatory philosophy. Went from egoism, free market capitalism, to predation. Now we're talking about a dictatorship, to now the ethics of selflessness, which is altruism. Altruism as a duty. Like, we should care more about the commons. We should all try to make the commons better and more accessible. Why are we only caring about our individual interests? We should only care about other people. When that's walked out and actually built into a system of exchange, what do we get from that system? We tend to get socialism. So ethics of selflessness, altruism, prioritize others' needs above one's own. Moral duty is to serve and sacrifice. At scale, institutionalized altruism is giving. Society may move towards systems, socialism, and redistribution of resources to support others. Shift from voluntary to structured. What begins as personal generosity, like, okay, I can give to somebody, can become policy, taxation, and mandated redistribution. So those would be some downsides, I guess, of course, where like, hey, I'm giving out of the goodness of my heart, to now in a socialistic society, no, you're going to give because everybody gives, and that's what you're going to do. Key benefit: can reduce inequality. It can reduce inequality and provide safety nets for vulnerable populations. It was so funny. I was listening to stories about I think it's Sweden. It's Sweden. I'm pretty sure it's Sweden that has a policy for expecting mothers, expecting families. So if my wife is pregnant and she has a baby, then what happens is there's this controversy in business, like how much time do they get off? Do they get paid? Do they not get paid? All this kind of stuff. And then they also say, well, how about the husband? The husband's supposed to support. Are they supposed to get paid time off or some time off or whatever it is? And in the U.S., it's like a mandated 3 months without pay. Like, you don't have to pay them for those 3 months. You can if you want to, but you have to at least give them that time. Like, they step away from work, but they can always come back to work after 3 months. And in Sweden, you can, between the husband and the wife, or the father and the mother, what you do is you have a collective 458 days or something. And you can just decide how you're going to split up those things. So I thought for a moment, I'm like, wow, if I'm working for an organization in Sweden and we have a couple kids, like, that's a lot of time off of work. And that'd be kind of nice. So that was my initial, it's just funny. Please don't judge me there. But anyways, when you scale altruism, so shift from voluntary to structured, the key tension here is how much should be required versus chosen. So even the story I just told you, think about that. Like, how can people be productive, and would people even want that? Is it required that you take these times off? Are they mandating it, or do you choose it? That's a big difference. You're still maintaining your freedom when you have that choice, balancing compassion with individual freedom and incentive. This is a big deal. So all right, so there's a lot of divides in politics, as we all know. And there's why are these divides there? Hopefully in this class, as you're enlightened in some sense, it's because of clashing of moral frameworks. It's not because of a color or a side of the aisle, or because of some character that's in office or some character that's not in office. It doesn't really matter. It's really about values. It's about ethics. It's about predation, power. It's about socialism, equality. It's about capitalism, freedom. Each define good differently. And so we're all looking at these situations with our own ethical lenses, and we're judging. We're putting normative values on things. Now, I'm not speaking for you, but I'm just saying society at large tends to do this. So mutual criticism. Each group views the others as flawed, unrealistic, or even unethical. So the root issue is disagreement is not just policy. It's fundamental values about human nature and society. Political divide is these ethical differences drive laws. Remember that. That's a big deal because we elect officials. We have ethical differences. We elect officials. They drive laws. Institutions, which are very powerful. I told you the story about coercing Warren Buffett to come to the White House, and economic systems. When we talk about redistribution, taxation, free market capitalism versus or innovation versus stagnation, and certain industries being regulated, and centralized control. These are all things that can affect us. So people justify actions through their own moral lens. What looks unethical from one perspective may feel necessary or right from another perspective. Understanding opposing views, which hopefully we'll be able to do tonight, matters. Effective leaders analyze the ethical reasoning behind decisions, not just outcomes. Many political conflicts are actually moral disagreements about what society should prioritize. There's some really powerful phrases on here, and I'm going to try my best. There's an image on the screen for those of you who are just listening to me. And I'm going to try my best to define capitalism. There's a great thinker, her name, and she's a philosopher and an economist in a way. Her name's Ayn Rand, and she's a big proponent of capitalism. I believe her story is she grew up in Russia, moved to the U.S., and was like, oh my gosh, what this place is unbelievable. Like I have to write about this because it's just incredible. So capitalism is an economic system where private individuals and businesses own resources and make decisions, driven by profit, competition, and market forces. I always say that capitalism has to have property rights, has to have contract law, and has to have free trade. I like those three pillars of capitalism. Without those three things, true capitalism, like capitalism at its finest, is very hard to achieve. It emphasizes free markets and entrepreneurship. Prices and production are determined by supply and demand, not by coercion or not by regulation or not by subsidies. Assumes individuals pursuing self-interest can drive overall economic growth. And so what does Ayn Rand say? Ayn Rand says the smallest minority on earth is the individual. Those who deny individual rights cannot claim to be defenders of minorities. So she's looking at the people saying, if you care about people, you should care about individuals. Therefore, capitalism is the best thing for individuals because that's what capitalism is for. So the other side of this equation here, which is downstream from capitalism, like sort of the alternative, is socialism. So as you can see, I'm defining these terms so you can kind of make sense of this chart. Socialism is an economic system where government or collective entities play a central role in controlling resources. So as opposed to the individuals creating stuff and free market trade and entrepreneurship, and you gain resources and you get to do what you want with them. You're voting essentially with every dollar in a capitalistic society. That's not the case in a socialistic society. So an economic system where government or collective entities play a central role in controlling resources with the aim of promoting equality and social welfare, focuses on reducing inequality. Government may control key industries or redistribute wealth. Decisions are guided more by social needs than profit. So the leading thinker here is Karl Marx. Karl Marx gets a bad rep. Like he's a philosopher and a thinker just like everyone else. He's an interesting guy. You know, again, he's an individual if you ever have his readings. And it tends to be like people call it Marxism. You know, you're a Marxist and whatever. But in order to learn about Karl Marx, first of all, he's had a tremendous influence on society as a whole. And some people discredit his work because it kind of led to this guy named Hegel, and then it led to the German regime, and then it led to whatever. But there's many other moving parts in it. But anyways, Karl Marx says, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. So it's caring about not only the abilities of people, but also the needs of people. But that also, if you're a fan of Jordan Peterson, it's like that's a terrible statement depending on how you look at that at scale. So Karl Marx receives a lot of criticism, and Rand receives a lot of criticism. Socialism receives a lot of criticism. Capitalism receives a lot of criticism. And I think one of my favorite quotes is saying, you know, capitalism is the best of the worst alternatives. Like they're all bad. You know, all these systems have their flaws in a sense. But capitalism seems to be the one that is the worst bad. Sorry, is the better of the worst. So anyways, those are those two systems. And you can see where some of these countries sit. You can see where China sat in the 1940s. You can see kind of where China sits today. You can see where the US was sitting in the 1950s. You can see kind of where the US is sitting today. So I'm going to briefly talk about behavioral economics and rational economics as well. So rational economics is a view of economics that assumes individuals are logical, informed, and self-interested, making decisions to maximize their benefit or utility. Decisions are based on reasoning and available information. Markets function efficiently because behavior is predictable, forms the foundation of many traditional economic models. So really, this is why government intervened, because a lot of this everybody's rational. Everybody just kind of does things according to the market. The free market is infallible. And candidly, that's not always true in a lot of ways. Like a lot of crazy stuff happens in the free market, and there's situation after situation where you can see that, considering the financial crisis of 2007 and the Great Depression, which some people will blame on the government, and which has some argument to it as well. But essentially, rational economics is what the U.S. used to believe. And now the U.S. is moving more towards something called behavioral economics, which anybody who understands economics is inherently it's not about money. It's about how people make decisions based on incentives. It's really studying people and how people make decisions. And so behavioral economics is a view of economics that recognizes individuals are not always rational and decisions are influenced by biases, emotions, and social context. People often act irrationally or inconsistently. Decisions are shaped by psychology and an environment. It explains real world deviations from perfect economic logic. So the leading thinker here is Daniel Kahneman. And Daniel Kahneman says we are prone to overestimate how much we understand about the world and to underestimate the role of chance. And the quote from Adam Smith, which is more rational economics. Adam Smith wrote a great book called The Wealth of Nations, which really formulated I think in 1776, when the U.S. was essentially founded. I think that's when they signed the Declaration of Independence. Adam Smith also published his book, The Wealth of Nations. And in 1776, the steam engine was used in a commercial setting, like for the first time. It was the technology was there, but it was now being used. So 1776 is a massive transition with Adam Smith's book, with the founding of the U.S., and with the steam engine. They really catapulted the Industrial Revolution. So Adam Smith said it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, which essentially means like the good-heartedness, just like the giving of the butcher, the brewer or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Like essentially, butcher's not there to make you dinner. The butcher's there to make money for themselves to provide their own family dinner, and they're there to cut meat so that you pay them. And yes, you can take the meat home to feed your family. So Adam Smith is basically advocating for the rational behavior behind these economic systems. So again, you can see kind of where Sweden sat in the 1960s, and you can see some of the reasons why they maybe transitioned. So the United States, the shift in the United States from the 1930s, 1950s, and 1990s was strongly moved towards capitalism and market-driven policies. It resulted in sustained economic growth, innovation, and expansion of the middle class. And then from the 1950s, 1990s to now 2016, the shift remains capitalistic, but incorporates more behavioral and regulatory awareness. The results now, we have a mixed economy. Continued growth with more emphasis on stability, consumer protection, and complexity. The government has more central power. There's more socialism baked into our economy and whatnot. So if you see China, which we'll talk about next, China in the 1940s, their shift from heavy socialism, central planning, towards market-based hybrid capitalism. So they went, essentially super socialistic, as you can see here. It's a major jump from 1940 to over here. Like they're not only going up, but they're going across. The U.S. kind of went across, but was still up here. China went up and across. So it's the major shift for them. Sweden, shift from socialist orientation towards a market-based system. And then Russia, shift from centralized socialism towards more market-oriented system. And then, of course, the China in the 1940s, we're going to talk about that next. Get out of here. So this guy, James Jerome Hill, this guy essentially was a self-made entrepreneur who built the Great Northern Railway without government subsidies. So he did an incredibly good project, not only for himself independently, but also for the common. Like he was an altruistic and an egoist at the same time. He focused on efficiency, cost control, and long-term profitability. The economic impact of what this gentleman, James Jerome Hill, did was it lowered transportation costs and connected markets, accelerated U.S. economic growth. My assumption is you have no idea who this person is. But hopefully now you understand the impact that James Jerome Hill had on how we live today. Like what he did was catapult the Industrial Revolution by allowing the exchange of goods by building this railway out of his own pocket, out of his own interest. Obviously, his interests were incentivized, but out of his own egoism, he was able to do something significantly helpful for the commons. Quality of life improvements, expanded access to goods, jobs, and new regions, raised living standards, the global influence. He demonstrated how private enterprise drives infrastructure and development. His model adopted in many other economies and other areas. So these two presidents, President Theodore Roosevelt, I believe Teddy Roosevelt is what a lot of people call him, and Woodrow Wilson, really expanded the power of government. They were more progressive in their laws, both of which were operating with what they knew at the time, but both of which believed that the free market economy really needed some constraints. And so some of the things that they created in the free market economy that were major government institutions is and rising of central planning is antitrust and regulation. They broke up large firms and increased oversight. They aimed at fairness but reduced some market freedom. So these major companies were essentially nobody could compete. They broke them up. Creation of the Federal Reserve System, that's huge in 1913. Centralized control of money supply and banking. Major shift towards government-managed monetary policy. And then the income tax. The income tax, this is so crazy. The income tax was the 16th Amendment, and it was amended in 1913. This is fairly new, this whole income tax concept. And they promised when they put the income tax in that we're only going to tax the wealthiest of people, and it was going to be 7%. It wasn't going to be much, and it was only going to be applied to the wealthiest of people. But then World War I came into play, and we decided to move into World War I as a nation. So they needed to raise resources. So that's how the income tax kind of grew very rapidly after 1913. Government gained power to directly tax income, expanded ability to fund programs and influence the economy. So the key trade-off here is more stability and oversight versus less economic freedom and market-driven decision making. Anybody know who these three people are without reading it? Modern tech leaders who emerged in relatively low regulation environments. So why is it that we now, if you close as you think about the most influential, wealthiest, most expansive businesses are all in the industry of what? What industry are they in? So my argument here is that the reason why the tech industry has received such growth is because of low regulation. When you have low regulation, from an economist perspective and the benefit of capitalism and free market economy, it means that you have high innovation. Technology sector had fewer barriers, allowed rapid experimentation and disruption, major disruption, entrepreneurship at scale. Individuals created entirely new industries, personal computing, e-commerce, space, electric vehicles, massive economic impact, generated trillions in value, reshaped global markets and consumer behavior and quality of life improvements, access of information, communication, convenience, and productivity tools. So I'm going to skip over this. I won't skip over it because I feel like I might not ever get back to it. So we obviously are exporting a lot of our innovative businesses and some of our creations to other nations. Like Europe is very heavily reliant on American innovation, and they're starting to innovate themselves. But candidly, a lot of countries just piggyback on the back of American innovation, and so Europe would be one of them. And so a lot of companies, a lot of countries are one of them. China obviously is changing in a lot of ways, and entrepreneurship is really a global revolution now. Like a lot of people understand the power of entrepreneurship, so they're freeing up markets, they're deregulating so that people can innovate because it's so powerful. Like Uganda, Chile, like these countries totally get entrepreneurship and they want to make it that way. But my point here is, how do other countries feel about the US? Perception of the US is mixed globally. Overall, median shows a split, roughly balanced between favorable and unfavorable views of the US. Strong regional differences, more favorable views in parts of Asia, Africa, and some allied nations, less favorable in parts of Europe and Latin America. Political, cultural, and economic influence matters. Perceptions are shaped by US foreign policy, economic pressure, and cultural influence. Trust impacts business. How a country is perceived affects how its companies are received. So how this graph affects us, like in other countries. Trust, partnerships, and market entry. Reputation extends beyond the firm. Companies carry their brand of their home country, national image, influence, business relationships. All that stuff influences business relationships. Inconsistent perceptions, as you can sort of see here, that's a strategic challenge. Firms must adapt messaging and operations based on how they are viewed in each region. So, does anybody know who this person is? Mao. Yeah, he established the communist China. He centralized control over economy, agriculture, and industry in China. So I don't know this man, but and this is where I assume, kind of like I assume about Karl Marx and other people, that I assume he had good intentions. I do. I have to. Most people. I don't know what he did, but what he did was he actually forced a mass by his decisions as a dictator and pulling his country into communist China. There was a great leap forward, which was called with the mass famine. Millions of people died. He forced policies, but he was trying to force industrialization as opposed to allowing the free markets to do what they do. He was trying to mandate industrialization from a communist, powerful, centralized force. So he forced policies that poor planning led to collapse in food production. Tens of millions died from starvation. Forced collectivization, private farms eliminated, people placed into state-run communes, loss of ownership and personal incentive, unrealistic quotas and resource control. Government took large portions of food based on false production reports, left populations without enough to survive. So restricted movement and information, people couldn't leave to find food, and failures were hidden, crisis worsened without correction. So thought that the policies and the political power being centralized was going to help. But thankfully, I mean, I don't say thankfully in a sense, but he passed away. So when he passed away, that regime passed away with him. And then Deng Xiaoping, I think is the best way to pronounce his name. So he shifted China from a strict central planning towards a hybrid, more capitalistic, as you can see in that movement of that chart. Introduction of market reforms allowed private enterprises, foreign investment, and profit incentives. He still maintained a collective power, a communistic power in a sense, but it was especially through special economic zones. So he would create cities, and we're going to look at a city now, to allow that city just to be a complete free market. Like, say, Hong Kong and what's this other city called? Shanghai. We're just going to allow them to just do it. Just in those areas, we're just going to see what happens. So essentially, allow private enterprise, especially through. So it doesn't matter if the cat is black or white, is a quote from him. Focus on what works, not ideology. Pragmatic approach to economic growth. This is very similar to American philosophers. Pragmatism, what works. Our current president tends to be classified as a pragmatist, by the way. Result: explosive growth, rapid industrialization, massive poverty reduction, and integration into the global economy. So the key insight with this guy is he's adding economic freedom and incentive, unlock productivity and growth even within a controlled political system. So this video is pretty mind blowing. If you haven't seen a video of Shanghai before, I'm going to show you this video, and the human initiative and innovativeness to create such a city, and especially after this guy Mao with his selective market freedom and what he did to now the shift from Deng, how quickly it was to see this visible rapid growth because of global trade and urban development. I mean, it's just incredible. So what happened with this deregulation and allowing for free market capitalism to come into Shanghai, you're allowing economic freedom in key cities like Shanghai while maintaining political control. So they still have very much political dominance. Like they still can coerce people whenever they want, but they allowed people to just do what they want in a capitalistic way. And so where China allowed markets and entrepreneurship, growth exploded, showing the link between economic freedom and development. So you can see how they kind of adopted some of that. This I think is important to note is that from 1978, where that gentleman before Mao passed away, and to 2022, per capita GDP grew from $228 per capita GDP is like per family, like per person, to $12,000 in 40 years. So marking a 60-fold increase through partial market reforms. So again, you could see how important these political decisions are. Does anybody know who Jack Ma is? CEO of Alibaba, but considered to be one of the most valuable companies in the world and is a significant competitor of Amazon. So he built Alibaba through the economic freedom introduction under Deng, this guy Deng. So market freedom, innovation at scale, China's partial capitalism enabled massive entrepreneurship and global trade and rapid growth of companies like Alibaba, significantly productive. And Amazon could not compete in China. So I'm not even sure if Amazon is even in China as far as a service. It's Alibaba. So this guy, I mean, considered an amazing entrepreneur in many ways, and just a genius. And he's provided a lot of value to 600 million people all over the world. Unfortunately, in 2020, he went into hiding for 5 years because the new leader, Mao, essentially left, halted Ant Group IPO and Ma. So who is the new guy in China? I forget his name. I think Xi Jinping. He essentially is going back towards more of this control and regulation, and so essentially this is why this guy had to go into, they're still receiving a lot of political authority, and ultimately the political authority is ultimately prevailing in a lot of ways, and it's sort of stifling some of this entrepreneurial growth because it's remember, individuals want to be able to create things, and when they create things they want to own them. Why do they want to own them? Because they want to retain the value. They want to have rights to the things that they create, and they want to know that when they put the hard work and effort into building a house, that house is going to be theirs, and that the government is there to protect their rights to that house. They're like, absolutely, that house is yours. And if your neighbor infringes on your ability to use your house, that neighbor is going to have penalties, legal penalties against them. So we want to do everything we can to protect your property. In China, that's not always the case, and that's a scary thought. When you create something, you put a lot of energy and effort into something, knowing that the government in a communistic regime and put these political ways, they could actually at any time choose to come in and take your personal property away. It's not. So protecting personal property rights is really at scale, is exactly what we want the government to do. We want them to protect our individual freedoms. And of course, I'm not saying, again, I'm trying to be neutral and trying to look at the utility of having a communist regime, and they are providing for the collective. They do a lot of things in these countries. And under, this guy Xi Jinping, let's see what he did. He consolidated political power, strengthened central control over economy and society, shift back towards state control. So he's increased regulation of tech, finance, and private firms, reduced autonomy of entrepreneurs, cracked down on big tech, actions against companies like Alibaba signal that government authority overrides market power. Back to that Wendy Edelman and Warren Buffett example. Focus on stability and control, prioritize national security, social stability, and party control over pure economic growth. So let's take a pause for a second. Prioritizing national security in and of itself it's not a sin. Prioritizing social stability in and of itself, I don't know. I'm not putting a moral judgment on it, but that sounds pretty good. And thinking that in order to do those things, we're going to have control. I think that's where the ethical dilemma comes into play, because it's saying, no, we as a collective, us and me and my 12 cronies or advisors are going to make decisions for you. Your interests are now in our hands. And this is the major shift in philosophical and political interest. Economic impact, slowing growth and innovation compared to earlier reform era, increased uncertainty for business, and we move on. So it's important to see this, and it's important to know that there's nations in this world, and I believe this is a fairly recent map, that are corrupt. And so corrupt reason, this is corrupt politics in a way. So perceived levels of public sector corruption. So when we use that example of receiving bribes in public office, that's a little bit different than receiving a bottle of wine from your you know your favorite restaurant. You go into your favorite restaurant and the owner comes out and brings you a free bottle of wine. I mean, that's a form of a bribe. It's like, hey, come back to my restaurant, bring your friends. It's a lot different to for a political figure to know somebody wants a particular road system in their neighborhood, and for that person to go to the political office and give the guy, $100,000 or something. That's not good. So examples of very corrupt nations from a public policy level are Somalia, North Korea, Venezuela, parts of Africa, and the Middle East. Common characteristics of the corrupt public sector corruption are weak or unstable governments, conflict or political instability, lack of transparency, and limited enforcement of laws. So middle corrupt nations, where if you go there, like you might be okay, but you should probably know somebody, so just be careful. These nations are Russia, China, much of Asia, some Latin American countries, and characteristics include some economic development, but inconsistent enforcement. Corruption may be built into business systems. And the lowest corrupt nations, these are the nations that should be trading with each other all the time. These are the nations that there should be no trade barriers. I'm putting a moral judgment on this, but I'm a big believer in free trade international. Big believer. I do not think that there should be many guardrails. I believe that nations should be able to trade freely. Obviously, I think I'm teaching in the business school, so this would be the case. Anyways, examples are US, Japan, Western Europe, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. These have strong institutions, rule of law, transparent systems, accountability, and mechanisms. So corruption is not random. It is deeply tied to a country's systems and institutions. Nations with strong legal frameworks, stable governance, and transparency tend to experience lower corruption, while weaker systems often allow it to persist. For global business, this creates real complexity. Practices that are illegal in one country may be common in another, and enforcement varies widely across regions. Here's another fun one. Ethical pressure is global. Employees everywhere feel pressure to bend rules. 22% say on the median say I bend rules. Pressure varies by region. Highest in South America, in North America, but present in all markets. It's interesting. Pressure to bend rules. Environment shapes behavior. Talked about this. Culture, leadership, and incentives influence ethical decisions. And I'm pretty sure this is the last slide. So these are the biggest concerns globally about things that could happen that people are worried about. And so they're polling CEOs, boards, and investors alike to see kind of what is your sentiment on this. So number one is cybersecurity risk. This is the top concern. Major concern across CEOs, boards, and investors. Threat to data, operations, and national security is number one. So investing ethically in these areas is something people care about. Technology and job displacement. Lots of people care about this one. Automation and AI, increasing efficiency. Risk of large-scale job loss and workforce disruption. Income inequality is number 3 on the list. Growing gap between rich and poor. Pressure on businesses to address fairness and social stability. The ethics of AI. Concerns about biases, decision-making, and control. Need for responsible development and use. And then the last one is climate change impact. Environmental risks affecting operations, supply chains, and long-term stability. So there's differences, obviously, in the CEOs, boards, and investors, and they just prioritize issues differently. This creates an interesting tension. What are we supposed to do? Global pressure on business, companies expected to address not just profit, but broader societal challenges. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed that when you reflect on some of these leaders that one might consider to be heroes and think about their lives